Okay, so back to this image where I kept accidentally opening it up. Let's take a look at Julia's logo. Oh, and I said I may have said Pantone instead of Pantone last video. It's Pantone, not Panettone. Sometimes I say it wrong for some reason. Okay, so we have Julia's logo on this not quite black and white image. It's very desaturated. There's some yellows in it. And we can see her logo relatively well because she used black to white gradients. So whatever we put it on, it's still legible, but I would argue it's most legible on anything that's not very gray. So the darker it is, the more legible reflections, the lighter it is, the more legible. But when we get into like these midtones, a lot of it disappears. So what can we do about that? Well, we could do something along the lines of this. I have a white square here. I just filled a marquee tool, took the marquee tool here, drew a square and filled it with white. And I have dragged this around so I can't see it. There we go. And notice how this behaves on white fairly well. Let's make another square and let's make this black. Oh, I think that's much more legible. And then let's make one more square. And this time we will fill it with gray. And we know how to get to gray. Just do 50% brightness. Here's logo on gray. So you can see that her logo shows up well on all three tones, but clearly better on black than the others. So how do we want the logo to behave when we're tossing it on photographs? Well, here's a really cool trick, and this is what I'm getting to. If we use something called difference mode, and that's just blending mode difference, the value of white will invert the colors behind it. So in this case, this square is on the fly doing an inversion effect. Oh, I couldn't even see those clouds before. That's neat. An inversion effect wherever we move it. And we can apply that to the logo. So here's the logo. Let's go ahead and put it in difference mode. Ah, there we go. Oh, look how much easier it is to read that. Except it still gets a little blurred on some of the grays. In fact, I'd argue that now the grays are behaving a little bit worse. So what can we do to fix that? Well, a couple of things. First, we can create an adjustment layer for levels. And as we adjust this, we can make this brighter or darker. But it's doing the whole thing. So what do? Hold down the Alt key and click between the layers to make a clipping mode. So now we can do the adjustments and it will only affect what's below. In this case, it's a logo layer because we got the logo layer in the background. So now if I move the logo around, it should automatically, quite vividly, adjust it. But we'll notice something else now. We have some weird off colors going on. And that's because the inversion is affecting differently now that we're boosting the colors around. And also the gradient would affect the inversion because it's not true inversion. It's it's not in true inversion and difference if it's not white. So what do we do about that? Well, let's go ahead and make a mode that can get rid of some of the values. We'll just desaturate it. We could use brightness contrast or vibrance. Let's go ahead and use vibrance. And we'll just take out all the saturation. But now we'll notice something else. It's still that weird yellow. Nothing changed. So what's going on here? Well, it has to do with how the calculations are occurring. When you set this to difference mode, it is set to difference mode, and that's it. But the thing is, it's setting the entire group of clipped things to it into this mode. We want it to actually set this to difference mode, then apply the desaturation effect, then apply the leveling. How do we do that? We double click on the layer, the original layer that's being clipped to, which is the only thing in difference mode. Everything else is in normal. And we see that there's an option called blend clipped layers as group. It should be as a group. Blend clipped layers as group. So in other words, it's taking all the adjustments and then it's applying the blend mode. We don't want that. We want the blend mode applied, and then we want everything else to occur. So unchecking the box means that the difference is applied, and then whatever's being clipped to it is applied afterwards. So let's see the difference, if you'll excuse the joke. Clipped as a group means everything that all these adjustments are clipped to it, and then all the blending mode, the difference is applied. We don't want that. Let's just turn that off. Okay, now that we're doing that, we're seeing wildly different effects. So what's going on now? Well, let's turn off the levels for a moment. So now with the desaturation, it's not doing strange things to the colors. Let me get the move tool back, grab the logo layer. It's just flat out inverting because it's desaturated. So we don't have any colors happening, because after it's done the difference, it gets desaturated. That's great. Now with the levels, let me bring that up. I may have made it a little too tight. I'm just changing it to solid black, to solid white, essentially on the far left, to white with some blacks. And using the gray, I can control the fade off on that. And again, my version has this strange effect in it. Her original one did not seem to have that. She kept it nice and clean, so I wouldn't worry about that. There we go. And so we have now V for move. There we go. We have a logo that will change. And again, the process for that was really straightforward. It worked very well because she has essentially a black and white logo here to begin with. I'd still put it on a solid somewhere so that it can be seen cleanly. We have the logo in difference mode. We have the mode set not to blend clip layers as a group. We have an adjustment layer that's doing a desaturation. You could use vibrance, hue, saturation, any of those, because they have saturation that can get rid of it. And then we're applying a leveling to it. And we don't necessarily have to. I might, in this case, make it pure black and white, just so that it has a stronger effect. But if I did that, I would want to have it as a grouped clipping thing, and that gets very complicated, and talk about that later. So in this case, right about here I think is good. Wherever we put it, now we can see it. Okay, so again, difference mode for the logo, desaturate it, just level it as necessary. Maybe you don't want to level it at all. You can play around with that. I'd level it just so that it has a higher contrast. Okay, so that's where that stands. So those are some effects that you could do on this itself as it goes in, but you'll notice that the roll-off isn't particularly great, so you'd want to play around with that a little bit more. That would be in levels. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the logo. Again, be cautious with grays on blacks and dark grays on blacks and light grays on white. That can cause visibility issues. I think that this was very well done having the gradation. It should show up pretty well pretty much anywhere. Again, I'm fine with the red, but I would recommend having a Pantone, and if failing that, if you don't want a Pantone, at least have it in a CMYK mode at the time that you color it, so that it's safe to print. So one last idea. What about a combination mark? So here it's a pretty straightforward deal. I just have the R, and I have this square around it. I have a reflection with a slight wave, and then I have a slight gradient on it. And as I played with it, I began to think, well, maybe not even that complicated. It may be more fun to go in and do something a little bit less. And with that, I would go in and take the gradient with a default, go to this this little guy. Oops, make sure that is set correctly. Maybe just remove a big chunk of the R so that it has a slight reflection to it and nothing more. But maybe not. But my concept is simply this, and I don't think the execution is particularly great, but this is about 3 minutes of work. Just put a little bit of a mirror on it and then reflect it. My concern though is that when it's by itself, it begins to look a little bit like a B, so you may want to be cautious with the font that's chosen. The other option is to do an inversion of this. I'll just do that with a quick difference to get an idea of what it would look like as a negative. And I would recommend using the R as a solid black in this case, because you can see that in different setups, it could be a little tricky to get going. All right, so those are just some ideas and where it's going. Overall, I think great job with the logo. I think that this is quite nice. Do watch out on the grays. Try it on black, try it on white, try it on gray. Move this up a little bit. Consider a different red. Consider white. I do like that photography and buy are different sizes so that it's easy to tell each of these pieces apart. You've got the reflections as a big, you have the photography as a medium, by Julia as small for the buy, slightly larger for the Julia. Everything's broken up by size. That's great. Simple concept. I do like the ripple. I would suggest trying it a little bit wider just to see if it has more or less of an impact on you. Also try it without it. See how that affects you. I think the ripple's good though. Overall, great job. And there are possibilities to play with. There's some more things that can go on. Again, my copy has this weird broken up gunk, which makes it a little hard going in. So if your copy has that, don't do that. I'm sure it doesn't though. So yeah, great logo. I just wanted to make a quick Q&A and talk a little bit about it. So hopefully you guys all learned something. And yeah, keep up the great work.